Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to look at Genesis 42, 1 through 28, and then we're going to look at 43, 26 through 34. We know that Joseph was just running the gauntlet God had set out before him. God was sovereignly orchestrating events that would lead to Israel's positioning before the Exodus. But we also are going to see God dish out some discipline on the brothers of Joseph who sold Joseph into slavery. It's fascinating how this story intersects with the concept at work in Lamentations, because these sons, these brothers, they're the namesakes for the tribes of Israel, and they behave horribly, but their names are engraved in the city of heaven. It's really, really fascinating. Look at Genesis 42. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? Listen," he went on, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we will live and not die." It's a pretty good reason to go. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. Okay, it's interesting. God is kind of setting the stage here for the events of chapter 42 to sort of parallel the events of chapters 37, I think, and 38 of Genesis. It's remarkable. We're going to look after the baby brother Benjamin once again, and you're going to see some parallels with some turning of tables here between how Joseph himself was sold into slavery by his brothers, and the news of his supposed death came to the father, and he was in despair. Now, the youngest brother is one who's never met Joseph. Here's verse 5. The sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all its people. His brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. So this is missing from all of the best-selling books that I've been able to find on Joseph. Okay, there are books like The Bait of Satan, for example, that they all just seem to put Joseph on a pedestal, and they outright overlook these aspects of Joseph's story. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan to buy food," they replied. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Okay, understand, at this point, Joseph is fluent in Egyptian, and he's probably wearing Egyptian eye makeup, and you can't quite tell that he's Hebrew by looking at him. Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of the land." So he remembered his dreams in which they would bow down to him. And then he calls them spies. "You've come to see the weakness of the land." Verse 10, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food," they said. "We are all sons of one man. We are honest. Your servants are not spies." So they call him my lord. They call themselves servants twice. Your servants, your servants. They are in effect bowing down to their brother exactly as he envisioned. But wait, it's going to get even more on the nose than that. They point out the fact that they're all sons of one man to say that we're not multiple representatives of uniting clans who are enemies of Egypt. Verse 12, "No," he said to them, "you have come to see the weakness of the land." But they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now living with our father, and one is no longer living." So there are 12 brothers. Joseph is one of those. He's the one they say is no longer living. But when they said 12, and when they said the youngest, they just told Joseph, "You've got a baby brother." But they don't know they're talking to Joseph. Then Joseph said to them, "I have spoken, you are spies. This is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." See, he's manipulating them to get to meet his baby brother, but he wants to make sure that baby brother's okay. He doesn't want the new baby brother to experience what he experienced. Send one from among you to get your brother. The rest of you will be imprisoned so that your words can be tested to see if they are true. If they are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. So Joseph imprisoned them together for 3 days. He already knows they're his brothers. He knows they're not lying. He uses these words perhaps to avoid, preemptively breaking the third commandment, before the third commandment was written, like just to, he doesn't want to make a proclamation contingent upon the honor of the name of Yahweh, whom he still worships secretly. And instead he says, as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. He knows that Pharaoh's alive. And so he's pretending to know, quote unquote, that his brothers are spies. So he imprisons them. Now it's their turn to get a little taste of what they put their brother through. On the third day, Joseph said to them, I fear God. Do this and you will live. If you are honest, let one of you be confined to the guardhouse while the rest of you go and take the grain to relieve the hunger of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me so that your words can be confirmed. Then you won't die. And they consented to this. So Joseph is changing the plan. They said to each other, obviously, we are being punished for what we did to our brother. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this trouble has come to us. But Reuben replied, he's the oldest. He was the one who spoke and said, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't murder our brother. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph understood them since there was an interpreter between them. See, I'm telling you, Joseph is being sneaky right now. He's not perfect. He foreshadows Jesus in several ways, but Jesus alone was sinless. Look at verse 24. He turned away from them and wept. Okay, he's still hurting. This is why I say his prayer was aspirational when he said that God has made me forget all of my trouble and my family. When he turned back and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. Joseph then gave orders to fill their containers with grain, return each man's silver to his sack, and give them provisions for their journey. This order was carried out. They loaded the grain on their donkeys and left there. At the place where they lodged for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver there at the top of his bag. That was the payment they were supposed to have submitted for the grain. He said to his brothers, my silver has been returned. It's here in my bag. Their hearts sank. Trembling, they turned to one another and said, what has God done to us? Now, we're going to fast forward. What I want you to see is that Joseph has not handled everything perfectly. But God is also disciplining his brothers to an extent for what they did. I mean, they're in prison for 3 days. Joseph was 30 when he finally, when he went into service of Pharaoh. He's a grown man now, but there's still some weirdness here. Verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought him the gift they had carried into the house, and they bowed to the ground before him. He asked if they were well, and he said, how is your elderly father that you told me about? Is he still alive? They answered, your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive. And they knelt low and paid homage to him. So twice now, the vision that Joseph had as a child has been realized in verses 26 and in 28. Verse 29, when he looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, he asked, is this your youngest brother you told me about? Then he said, may God be gracious to you, my son. Joseph hurried out because he was overcome with emotion for his brother, and he was about to weep. He went into an inner room and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. Regaining his composure, he said, serve the meal. They served him by himself, his brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who were eating with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, since that is detestable to them. They were seated before him in order by age, from the firstborn to the youngest. The men looked at each other in astonishment. portions were served to them from Joseph's table, and Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than any of theirs. They drank and became drunk with Joseph. So he's partying now with his brothers. They are astonished because they thought that they were going to be stuck in jail or even they were going to die. And Reuben and Simeon seem to have an idea of what's going on. They believe that they're in discipline from God for what they did to Joseph. But all the while, Joseph is still keeping it a secret. He's hiding his emotions. He's getting drunk with his brothers. He's certainly showing favoritism to Benjamin because that's his baby brother whom he's never met. When he was the baby brother, he was thrown into slavery. Now that Benjamin's the baby brother, Benjamin gets 5 times as much food as anybody else. And in a time of famine, because God provided through the vision interpretation that Joseph had, they have an abundance of food. So Joseph is still being a little bit sketchy here. His brothers are going through discipline of their own, but that discipline is a fraction of what they did to Joseph. What Joseph went through was several times harder than what they went through. So I want to point out both that they believe there's been this sort of turning of the tables, and rightly so. It's sort of like a turning of the tables, the events of Genesis 37 through 39. And now Joseph's in a totally different role, and Benjamin's the new baby brother. And the brothers are astonished. They're weirded out. They don't know what's going on. They thought that they'd been sabotaged, when they're camping out on the way home. And they find that the silver that they definitely gave to Joseph, whom they don't know to be Joseph, has been put back in their bags. Now, what Joseph's done is manipulated, but it also is going to ensure that they all come back. He's making this family reunion. And he's not being forthright. He's not being totally honest. But in the end, he does show great forgiveness. And he does acknowledge, as does the book of Lamentations, that God is sovereign from generation to generation. He's on his throne forever. If you're going through your own Lamentations season, God has put you through the meat grinder of his discipline because of sin in your life. You're going to have to absolutely forgive. We've got a couple more devotions. We're going to look at the story of Joseph, but I wanted to include these passages so as not to set an unrealistic bar with Joseph. The fact that Joseph, who's able to rightly forgive his brothers, be reconciled and reunited with his father, the fact that he, who wasn't really going through the discipline of God, by the way, that was just the gauntlet God had set out before him, and it's the way in which the people of God are positioned in Egypt before the Exodus. It's the way in which he would foreshadow Jesus. Even though he wasn't really going through a season of discipline in his life, he still exercises incredible forgiveness. So if Joseph can do that, even though Joseph wasn't perfect, as you can see, you and I definitely ought to be able to exercise forgiveness when we go through seasons of discipline for sin in our lives. Recognize the people through whom God may work to humble us. They are going to be dealt with by God on their own. If you direct hostility at them and direct hostility at God, that hostility is misdirected. That hostility ought to be directed at your own sin. Cut it off, gouge it out, repent drastically, no matter the cost. Forgive every player involved because they're all pawns in God's hand. He's always sovereign. Like we saw in the closing of Lamentations, he's on his throne from generation to generation over Jacob and his sons, Joseph and his brothers, and over you today, right now. God is sovereign. He forgives us. We ought to absolutely forgive. When you can forgive the way you're going to see Joseph forgive, he hasn't done it yet, you're going to feel chains on your heart break away. And you're going to feel your 6-year-old Christmas morning joy come rushing back.